Welcome to the Deconstructionist Deep Dive.
The podcast that doesn't just accept the story.
We break it
We examine the pieces.
and expose the machinery inside.
Let's dive in.
Our mission today is focused on one central, provocative question for you, the learner. What if the relentless pursuit to unlock your hidden potential isn't the path to freedom, but the most insidious cage ever invented?
That framing is really, really crucial, I think, because we're not just picking apart, some harmless self-help tips here.
Right.
We are looking at a system, a pattern. You see it replicated constantly, don't you? In organizational psychology, in corporate training seminars, and definitely in those ubiquitous analysis guides that promise the secrets to success.
Those guides that seem to be everywhere.
Our goal today is to take a deep, critical cut into how this material actually functions, how it works as, frankly, an ideological weapon.
Absolutely. And we've gathered sources that really trace the history, the evolution of modern self-improvement. How seemingly benign, positive, motivational concepts have been kind of co-opted over time.
Hijacked, almost.
Hijacked, yeah. To advance a very specific kind of neoliberal structure. So our goal today isn't just like pointing out flaws in a particular book or theory.
No, it's bigger than that.
It's about exposing the core machinery, the philosophical gears, the economic underpinnings that, well, keep the modern individual constantly feeling like they're not quite enough.
That perpetual inadequacy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And perpetually running on this treadmill that, and this is the key part, they fundamentally believe they chose for themselves.
Right. The illusion of choice is powerful. We really have to move beyond just the surface level advice, the tips and tricks. Look, if you genuinely want to resist a system, you first have to understand its structural foundations. As the source material strongly suggests, if you build this supposedly liberating structure, this path to potential on these specific foundational lies,
Doesn't free you.
it can't free you. It actually becomes the perfect personalized cage because you helped build it.
Okay, let's unpack that, this structural foundation.
Yeah.
We're starting with what our sources identify as 3 core axioms.
Axioms, like the non-negotiable starting point.
Exactly. These are the premises that basically every potential unlocking framework relies on. They're almost never debated or questioned. They're just accepted as the architecture, the bedrock for control.
Precisely. They are the absolute bedrock assumptions of the entire self-optimization culture that we're swimming in. If you accept these 3 things as just, well, true.
You're already halfway in.
You're already halfway inside that cage, yeah.
Okay, axiom 1. This one is probably the most visible, the most widely accepted, the success axiom.
Ah, yes, the success axiom. This axiom basically demands that success be seen as universal, right?
Yep.
And monolithic. Like, there's only one real version of it.
And measurable. Hugely measurable.
And measurable, absolutely. A quantifiable end state. It doesn't really tolerate ambiguity, and it certainly doesn't allow much room for purely personal, internal definitions of what success might mean to you.
So what is the definition then, according to this axiom?
Well, it's primarily, almost exclusively defined by professional achievement, climbing the ladder, getting that promotion, the higher salary, those quantifiable metrics.
And crucially, public recognition.
Yeah.
It has to be seen.
It has to be seen. That's key. So the implicit values being shoved into that definition are pretty clear, aren't they? Productivity, visibility, you must be seen achieving, and of course, material accumulation, wealth.
Right. But what's fascinating here and what our sources really dig into is the historical root. This isn't some brand new idea they just cooked up.
Not at all. It's basically the post-industrial capitalist evolution of the old Protestant work ethic.
Can you unpack that connection a bit?
Sure. Think about the original Calvinist framework, right? Visible wealth, worldly success. It wasn't just success. It was seen as a sign of divine grace, God's favor.
Okay.
Today, let's say the explicit grace part has been secularized, stripped away. But the demand for visible, measurable proof, that remains incredibly strong.
So how did it evolve from, say, the industrial era?
Well, in the industrial era, you could maybe be seen as a good, virtuous worker just by, doing your job diligently in the factory, showing up, putting in the hours.
Right, consistent effort.
Consistent effort. But in today's knowledge economy, the gig economy, that's just not enough anymore. Your diligence, your hard work, it has to translate into visible metrics, KPIs, key performance indicators, likes, followers, revenue growth, some kind of public performance.
So if your effort is quiet, internal, invisible to the market.
It's basically worthless within this framework. It doesn't count.
So let's say I'm a person, and my personal definition of success is, I don't know, raising a well-adjusted family. Or maybe mastering a subtle craft like woodworking, something that brings deep contentment but isn't easily scalable for venture capital funding.
Right.
This framework, the success axiom, it just dismisses that at a hand.
It does more than just dismiss it. And this is the really critical flaw of this axiom, according to the analysis. It actively erases those alternatives. It even pathologizes them.
Apologizes.
Well, if your primary goal is something like contentment or maybe creative fulfillment that deliberately avoids the market pressures, the system doesn't just say, oh, that's nice for you. It subtly tags you
As what?
as someone who's maybe lacking ambition. Or worse, suffering from unrealized potential. You see, you're not actually successful by their rules. You're just not trying hard enough to fit their definition. You're failing to maximize.
Wow. Okay, that sets up a perfect psychological trap, doesn't it? Which leads us directly, I think, to axiom 2, the potential axiom.
Ah, the big one.
This feels like the core deception. It's presented as just common sense, but it's actually quite a profound metaphysical claim.
It really is. The claim is basically this. Every single human being possesses this fixed internal reservoir of untapped, hidden potential, just sitting there waiting to be unlocked.
Like buried treasure inside you.
Exactly. And this creates a fundamentally deterministic framework. Your life outcomes, your success, your happiness, your wealth, they are primarily determined by your individual effort, your personal grit in tapping that internal reservoir.
It's such an appealing idea, though. I mean, who doesn't want to believe they have infinite power locked inside them?
Oh, it's incredibly seductive. But the real power of the idea, its political utility, lies entirely in its obfuscation function.
Obfuscation, masking something. What does it mask?
It's brilliant political technology, really. Think about it. If there are genuine systemic barriers blocking your path to success, things like rigid class structures, pervasive racial biases in hiring, lack of access to quality education, or maybe just not having the startup capital.
All the external stuff.
All the external structural stuff. This axiom immediately shifts the spotlight. It yanks it away from the system.
And puts it where?
It tells you relentlessly to look inward, not outward. If you're struggling financially, the reason isn't stagnant wages or poor social safety nets. No, it's that you just haven't fully accessed your personal reservoir of hustle and potential.
Right. If your small business fails.
It's not because of, say, the massive market advantage held by entrenched corporations or unfair competition. No. It's your failure. Your failure to manifest your inherent potential. It places all the responsibility.
And therefore all the blame.
Precisely. All the blame squarely on the individual's shoulders. The system is never at fault. You are.
And the economic utility of this axiom is just massive.
Oh, it's profound. If we collectively accept this idea of an infinite, untapped internal reservoir, what have we just created?
A never-ending market.
A perpetual market for tools, techniques, guides, coaches, anything that claims to help you access it. This axiom is basically the oxygen for the entire lifelong learning industry. The billion-dollar coaching markets, the productivity apps, the gurus, the seminars.
It's a self-fueling industry built entirely on the premise of your perpetual inadequacy. You must keep buying, keep learning, keep optimizing, because you are, by definition, perpetually incomplete. You haven't unlocked it all yet.
It's the perfect loop, isn't it? Think about it. If you buy the coaching program and you succeed, well, the coach and the program take the credit for unlocking your potential.
Right. Proof it works.
But if you buy the program and you fail or don't get the results you wanted, well, clearly you failed to implement the coaching effectively. Your potential is still there, obviously, just buried deeper, which means you need
more coaching, more investment.
Exactly, more investment. The system always wins.
Okay, so you've got this premise of perpetual inadequacy, this internal reservoir. But to make it sound really credible, really solid, they need to bring in the big guns.
Ah, yes, the appeal to authority.
Which brings us neatly to axiom 3, the scientific legitimacy axiom.
This is the rhetorical strategy that really hardens these ideological claims into what feels like unchallengeable truth. How do they do it? They deploy the language of social science everywhere.
All those phrases.
Studies show, research finds, evidence-based practices. You hear it constantly. It functions as this ultimate authority mechanism. It effectively turns these claims, which are often deeply ideological, into conversation enders. I mean, who are you to argue with the data?
Right. The host of some motivational seminar pulls up a PowerPoint slide with a chart, maybe cites a study published in some relatively obscure journal on organizational behavior.
Maybe with a tiny sample size or questionable methods?
Doesn't matter. Suddenly their claim like, you absolutely must wake up at 5 a.m. every day if you want to be a billionaire, isn't just their personal opinion or anecdote anymore.
Nope. It's presented as scientific fact. End of discussion.
But the analysis points out a severe epistemological flaw here. Epistemology being about how we know what we claim to know.
Yes, and the flaw is huge. They are constantly treating correlation as causation. Just because two things happen together doesn't mean one caused the other.
Like the example we'll get to later about web browsers.
Exactly. And they're taking these impossibly complex human behaviors and societal dynamics and reducing them, boiling them down into these easily digestible, super marketable claims, sound bites.
Because simplicity sells.
Simplicity sells guides, it sells courses, it sells apps. Even if achieving that simplicity requires sacrificing nuance, complexity, and sometimes just the plain truth about the human condition.
Okay, so let's recap the foundations of this cage. We have Axiom 1, success equals visible, measurable, professional achievement.
Check. Axiom 2, your hidden potential is the key determinant, meaning failure is your fault for not unlocking it.
Check. And Axiom 3, all of this is backed by science, making it seem objective and unquestionable.
Got it. The framework is set.
So the framework is ready. Now we need to move into the tools, the sort of ideological repackaging mechanisms. These are the things that provide the psychological motivation, the drive, to keep the user willingly running on that treadmill.
Right. We're shifting now from the overt architecture of control, the axioms, to the subtler, maybe more insidious ways the system co-ops our deepest desires and drives, our psychology.
Okay, first up, let's talk about the evolution of hustle culture. The old school traditional hustle, work 80 hours a week, sleep is for the weak, suffer publicly for your ambition.
Yeah, the grind set influencers.
That whole thing, it's become a bit unmarketable lately, hasn't it?
Yeah.
There's more awareness about burnout, mental health.
Definitely. So they had to adapt. They evolved it into a new variant. And this is clever. Rebranded hustle culture, often marketed under the banner of self-compassionate productivity.
Self-compassionate productivity sounds
That
safe.
sounds much softer, much kinder. And that's the brilliance of it.
Yeah.
It cleverly incorporates the language of mental health, of self-care, but ultimately it weaponizes it for the same old goal, maximizing output.
So the aim is still maximum efficiency, minimum wasted time. It's just wrapped in fuzzy language.
Very much the underlying logic hasn't changed that much.
What are some of the key tactics identified here? They're quite fascinating.
Oh, they are. Take procrastination, for example. A classic enemy of productivity, right?
Right. Something to be overcome.
Well, in this rebranded hustle, instead of just admitting you failed to act, they redefine it. It becomes creative incubation.
Creative incubation.
Yeah. So you're not just mindlessly scrolling social media because you're avoiding that difficult report. No. You are strategically allowing your subconscious mind to connect disparate ideas before you unleash a massive burst of genius-level production.
It's pure linguistic gymnastics, isn't it? Framing avoidance as strategy.
Totally. And similarly, they champion something called imperfectionism.
Imperfectionism, letting go of perfection. Sounds healthy.
On the surface, yes, it sounds like giving yourself permission to relax your standards, be less stressed. But strategically, within this framework, it's positioned as an advantage. Why? Because it ensures you ship fast, iterate constantly, prioritize speed and volume over maybe deeper, slower quality.
Which aligns perfectly with
The demands of the modern gig economy, digital platforms, software development cycles, anything that requires constant novelty, constant updates, constant content. Get it out now, fix it later, or never.
And nothing illustrates this co-option better, I think, than the rebranding of self-care. Self-care becomes purely performance optimization.
This one is insidious. You don't engage in self-care. Take a break, get a massage, meditate for intrinsic reasons like rest or joy or just existential peace and quiet.
No, why do you do that?
You go to the float tank, or you optimize your sleep schedule, or you track your macros with obsessive detail, because optimal physiological alignment supposedly leads to, say, 20% better focus tomorrow.
Which translates directly into
Higher output, more productivity, better performance metrics. Your well-being is valuable only insofar as it makes you a better, more efficient worker.
So even our most basic human needs, rest, reflection, physical health things, that should be acts of resistance against the machine.
They're immediately folded back into the machine's demands. It's like if you neglect your self-care routine, you're not just tired or stressed, you're being inefficient. You're actually becoming a drag on your own potential ROI.
Wow. Okay, beyond tweaking our individual performance, the system also relies heavily, according to the sources, on moral binaries as control tools.
Yes, and the prime example of this is the brutally simplistic reduction of incredibly complex social dynamics into the giver-taker dichotomy.
Givers and takers. We hear this language a lot, especially in business books.
We do, and it's presented as this fundamental truth about human nature. But look, human interaction, altruism, reciprocity, self-interest, these things are messy, they're nuanced, they depend hugely on context.
But these guides flatten all that complexity.
They flatten the entire world into the simple, stark binary.
Yeah.
You are either a pure, selfless giver, always focused on helping others, lifting them up,
Uh-huh.
or you are a malicious, calculating taker, focused only on your own personal gain, extracting value, climbing over others. There's rarely any middle ground acknowledged.
And the sources point out how they use celebrity examples, right, to kind of hammer this home.
Oh, absolutely. Archetype deployment. You get the classic taker archetype. Maybe it's the highly self-centered sports star who achieves individual glory but burns bridges and alienates teammates.
Contrasted with
The giver archetype, often portrayed as the humble, team-oriented leader, the servant leader who facilitates success for everyone else. Think about that classic, almost certainly manufactured dichotomy we often see between, say, two global football superstars.
right, where one is consistently framed as the individualistic, goal-obsessed machine, the taker archetype.
And the other is framed as the selfless, team-first magician, the ultimate giver who makes everyone around him better, even if the reality is far more complex for both.
And this dichotomy isn't just descriptive, it's loaded with moral judgment.
Hugely. It encourages virtue signaling, but specifically through productivity-enhancing behaviors. If you are seen to be helping others, mentoring junior colleagues, providing loads of uncompensated emotional labor in the workplace.
You get the halo.
You get the halo. You are virtuous. You are a giver. Good job.
And this is where the deconstruction gets really interesting. There's a fundamental structural contradiction here, isn't there? What's the actual corporate utility of promoting this giver ideal so heavily?
Well, think about it. The corporate utility is precisely to encourage exactly that unpaid, uncompensated emotional labor and extra work. You're constantly told to help your team, be generous with your time, go the extra mile for colleagues.
That sounds nice.
It sounds lovely, but when this is executed perfectly by a dedicated, perhaps slightly naive employee, the ideal giver, it becomes, ironically, a highly sophisticated and sustainable taker strategy for the person or the entity at the top.
Yes.
Because the manager, the executive, the shareholders, they benefit directly from all that free, emotionally subsidized labor. The giver, who works tirelessly to mentor, support, collaborate, build morale.
They're basically providing the social lubricant.
They provide the social glue that holds the team together, often absorbing stress and compensating for poor management. While the savvy taker, perhaps the boss or the founder, walks away with the lion's share of the capital, the equity, the power, all leveraged off the giver's goodwill and extra hours.
The giver enables the taker's success within the structure.
In many corporate settings, absolutely. That dynamic leads directly to this specific and, frankly, deeply cynical archetype the sources identify, the disagreeable giver.
The disagreeable giver. That sounds like a contradiction in terms.
It does, right? But this is where organizational psychology gets really clever in its application. The disagreeable giver is the individual who is allowed, maybe even subtly encouraged, to channel dissent, to offer brutal honesty, to challenge the status quo.
Okay. Sounds like a positive force, someone speaking truth to power.
Sometimes, but there's a crucial condition. They are allowed to be disagreeable only if their dissent, their critique, ultimately serves to improve the current hierarchy's efficiency, profitability, or stability.
So it's not about fundamental change.
Rarely. It's designed primarily as a mechanism for channeling genuine frustration, real dissatisfaction into system-preserving innovation. You're allowed to criticize the process, yes, but your critique must result in a proposal for a cheaper, faster, more profitable version of the same system.
And then you're expected to enthusiastically execute that improvement.
Exactly. It's dissent containment, repackaged as empowerment.
The sources draw a parallel here.
Yes, the perfect parallel instance we see popping up everywhere is the rise of corporate innovation labs or disruption committees or entrepreneurship programs.
Right. They sound exciting and radical.
They're often presented as these vibrant spaces for radical thinking, for challenging assumptions, for blue sky ideas. But structurally, they often function primarily as safe, contained zones for dissent.
How so?
You can challenge the product design. You can challenge the marketing strategy. You might even challenge middle management practices. But can you ever fundamentally challenge the core structure of ownership, the distribution of profits, the underlying capitalist imperative driving the whole enterprise?
Usually not. Those foundations remain sacred.
Precisely. The core power structure remains untouched. Dissent is allowed only if it ultimately strengthens the cage.
Okay, so we've covered the basic axioms, the structural foundation, and we've looked at the psychological repackaging tools like rebranded hustle and the giver-taker myth. Now we need to get even deeper, more personal. How does this system co-opt our most profound, sometimes traumatic human experiences?
This is where the emotional hooks are set really deep into the learner psyche, into your psyche. We need to analyze trauma narrative rescripting.
Trauma narratives. We see these everywhere, especially in memoirs, TED Talks, leadership blogs. What's the mechanism identified?
The mechanism is pretty standard, almost formulaic sometimes. Step 1, acknowledge the trauma. Yes, this terrible thing happened to you. Abuse, loss, illness, accident, systemic oppression. Validate the pain.
Okay, that seems reasonable.
It is. But then, almost immediately, step 2, pivot. Immediately pivot the narrative to emphasize post-traumatic growth, or PTG.
PTG, post-traumatic growth. This idea that suffering inevitably leads to strength, wisdom, higher performance.
Exactly. The focus instantly shifts away from any discussion of collective suffering or systemic injustice that might have caused the trauma or the need for policy change or societal support. All of that gets sidelined.
And instead, the focus becomes
entirely onto the individual's heroic struggle and subsequent triumph. Trauma is reframed. It becomes a personal crucible, the necessary fire, the essential fuel required for your later success story. The obstacle becomes the way.
And the utility of this pivot, especially for a neoliberal order that emphasizes individual responsibility above all else, it's huge, isn't it?
It's astonishingly useful. It's arguably the ultimate individualization tool. Think about it. Systemic problems like the ongoing trauma of endemic poverty, or the daily trauma of racial discrimination, or the trauma of living without adequate health care or social support, all these are converted entirely into personal challenges, opportunities for growth.
So if you had a difficult childhood due to systemic neglect or experienced deep loss because of societal failures,
the unspoken expectation, amplified by these narratives, is that you must somehow spin that pain into a powerful business origin story or a source of unique insight that gives you a competitive edge.
and the result for the system.
The system is effectively relieved of any responsibility. It doesn't need to prevent trauma in the first place or provide meaningful collective support afterward. Why? Because individual redemption, individual growth from trauma is always presented as possible, even desirable. If only you try hard enough, if only you have the right mindset.
So if you failed to grow from your trauma into some kind of high performer,
Then, within this framework, that's defined as your personal failure. You failed to maximize the opportunity embedded in your suffering. Society never has to change its structures because the burden of adaptation is placed entirely on the individual survivor.
this completely ignores some crucial counter data, though, which the sources make a point of highlighting.
Absolutely. The data actually shows that resilience, the quiet, difficult, necessary act of simply surviving trauma and continuing to function, maybe finding some stability or peace, is statistically far, far more common than PTSD in trauma survivors. Resilience is the norm, not dramatic transformation.
Yet the self-help narrative, the dominant cultural narrative, demands the construction of this dramatic trauma to triumph arc in almost every case. Why?
Because resilience, quiet survival, isn't dramatic enough. It doesn't sell books or seminars. It doesn't make for a viral TED Talk. The trauma to triumph narrative, however, is highly marketable. It's compelling storytelling.
And it reinforces the core axiom that individual effort and mindset can overcome literally any obstacle, no matter how horrific or systemic.
Precisely. It even subtly pathologizes the very act of moving forward quietly, resiliently, without needing to turn your pain into a public performance or a brand. If you didn't become a globally recognized speaker or a multimillionaire because of your trauma, the system subtly suggests you simply didn't maximize the growth opportunity inherent in your suffering.
Okay, so trauma gets co-opted. What about the desire for excellence, the drive for mastery, for doing truly high-quality work? Is that also targeted?
Oh, absolutely. It's attacked quite cleverly through what the analysis calls the perfectionism diversion.
A perfectionism diversion, how does that work?
It's a classic rhetorical strategy.
Right.
You create a straw man argument. They relentlessly attack a pathological extreme, the cripplingly anxious, never shipping perfectionist. The person who stalls projects indefinitely because one comma isn't perfect or one pixel is slightly off.
Right. That paralysis is obviously unproductive.
It is, and that extreme dysfunctional version of perfectionism is set up as the great enemy of progress, of
Yeah.
success, of potential.
Okay, so they set up that straw man. What's the advocated alternative then?
The alternative, relentlessly pushed, is constant iterative production, the gospel of good enough. We are constantly encouraged, no, pressured to launch fast, fail forward, iterate, put out minimum viable products, and worry about quality later, if ever.
And the crucial question we have to ask is, what specific economic or systemic demands does this good enough philosophy perfectly align with?
Well, it aligns perfectly, doesn't it, with the demands of the gig economy, the pressures of digital product launches, the content mills, and the general logic of fast capitalism. These systems require constant production, often cheap labor, and quick disposable iterations rather than deep, lasting quality.
So the psychological impact of constantly framing perfectionism, or even just high standards, as the enemy is pretty immense.
It really is, because it actively pathologizes the very desire for mastery, for care, for taking the time to do something truly excellent. If you want to invest the time to do something really well, something careful, considered, robust, long-lasting, whether that's writing a profound novel, engineering a truly reliable piece of software, or building a beautiful piece of furniture.
You're not seen as dedicated to quality.
No. Within this framework, you're increasingly labeled as suffering from a self-limiting psychological block, a pathology called perfectionism that needs urgent treatment, perhaps via a $49 online course on the virtues of rapid iteration and shipping crap fast.
It creates a culture where the meticulous, passionate pursuit of excellence, of craft, is viewed not as a virtue, but as an internal flaw, a bug to be fixed.
Exactly. A deviation from the optimal path of rapid, marketable output.
Okay, wow. We've broken down the axioms, the repackaging, the co-option of personal experience. Now we need to put it all together and move to the systemic analysis of identified deceptions. We need to use that framework table from the sources to see precisely who benefits from each specific ideological trick.
Yes. This transition is absolutely key. If we only criticize the ideas themselves, we miss the power dynamics, we miss the capital flow. We have to follow the money, follow the power, and name the beneficiaries of this cage.
All right, first one up from the framework, the meritocracy of originality. This seductive idea that the lone genius, the visionary entrepreneur with a brilliant, unique idea, can disrupt the entire system and succeed based purely on their singular vision and grit.
Who benefits most directly from promoting that narrative?
Well, the analysis points squarely at the tech and venture capital VC economy.
Makes sense. And there's a powerful historical parallel identified, isn't there?
Yeah, the old great man theory of history, the idea that major historical changes are primarily driven by singular heroic figures, kings, generals, inventors, rather than by broader social forces, collective movements, or technological inevitability.
It's the same individualistic focus. So
Yeah.
what's the real-world impact of constantly promoting this myth of the lone original genius?
It completely obscures, almost intentionally, the massive structural factors involved in success. Things like the huge capital requirements needed for actual innovation, the importance of existing infrastructure, the massive advantage conferred by pre-existing familial wealth and elite network privileges.
All the stuff that isn't just about a good idea.
Exactly. So if your startup fails, this narrative conveniently shifts the blame away from, say, insufficient access to capital markets or predatory practices by entrenched monopolies, and points instead to your perceived lack of true originality, or maybe just insufficient personal grit. It wasn't the system, it was you.
Okay, next deception. The weaponization of science, which ties back to Axiom 3. Who's the primary beneficiary when social science language is used to lend unearned authority to self-help claims?
The analysis is pretty blunt here. The entire self-help industry benefits. The coaching complex, the corporate training sector, and basically any organization that needs a seemingly objective justification for its internal policies or productivity demands.
And the historical parallel the sources bring up is quite chilling.
It really is, phrenology. For listeners who might not know, phrenology was this wildly popular 19th century pseudoscience. Its proponents claimed you could determine a person's intelligence, their character, even their moral tendencies, just by meticulously measuring the bumps and contours of their skull.
Utter nonsense, scientifically.
Complete nonsense. But it was presented with charts, measurements, scientific-sounding jargon. It was fundamentally an ideological claim often used to justify existing class divisions and racist hierarchies, but cleverly dressed up in the authoritative language of science.
And that's exactly what happens today, albeit in more subtle forms. The impact is severe. It systematically replaces genuine critical thinking and structural analysis with a kind of unquestioning data worship.
You see a chart in a presentation, you see a footnote citing a study, any study, and you're subtly trained to just shut down the skeptical part of your brain, accept it as fact.
And that flawed research we discussed earlier, the correlational studies presented as causal proof, the studies with tiny sample sizes or biased funding that becomes the modern-day equivalent of measuring bumps on a skull. It feels scientific, but it's often just justifying a pre-existing belief or agenda.
Okay, let's skip the co-option of dissent for now, as we covered it well with the disagree giver. Let's move to the really emotionally charged one, trauma to triumph. Who is the ultimate beneficiary when personal suffering is systematically reframed as a necessary prerequisite for growth and success?
According to the analysis, the primary beneficiary isn't an industry, it's the neoliberal order itself, the entire system that thrives on individualization and personal responsibility.
And the historical parallel is quite potent.
Yeah, it's the bedrock myth of American exceptionalism, isn't it? The bootstrap mythology. The idea that anyone, regardless of their starting circumstances, can achieve success through sheer hard work and determination alone. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps.
And the impact of applying this logic to trauma, as we've established, it completely privatizes suffering.
Completely. The system itself doesn't need to change. It doesn't need to fund mental health care adequately, or reform unjust social structures, or provide robust safety nets. Why bother? Because individual victims are supposed to heroically transmute their pain into fuel for self-optimization and personal triumph. The responsibility is solely theirs.
Okay, finally, let's hit the core ideological lie, the linchpin, the potential paradox. This foundational idea of an infinite, untapped reservoir inside each of us. Who benefits most directly from propagating that belief?
The analysis points to two massive sectors: the education industry, particularly the booming lifelong learning and skills retraining market, and the entire perpetual personal development complex: coaching, apps, books, seminars.
And the historical parallel offered is quite provocative.
It is. Our sources link this modern concept of potential, historically, to the secular replacement for the traditional religious concept of the immortal Christian soul. Well, the soul was conceived as this internal, infinite, precious resource that required constant spiritual work, guidance, and tending throughout life. Potential functions in a remarkably similar way in our secular age. It's positioned as this innate, limitless internal resource that demands endless cultivation, optimization, and development, often purchase development.
Wow. So the impact is baked in.
Yeah.
Guaranteed perpetual inadequacy.
Exactly. The very second you achieve one goal, knock one item off your vision board, the system is right there whispering in your ear, reminding you that you've only accessed, maybe 10% of your real potential. There's always more to unlock.
Which demands continuous, often purchased development. If you internalize the belief that you are perpetually inadequate until fully unlocked.
You become a perpetually loyal customer for anyone selling a key.
Okay. So we've systematically analyzed who benefits. Now we need to dig even deeper into the why. Why does the system have such a powerful hold? We need to examine the underlying philosophy more closely and really nail down the methodological holes in the research used to prop it all up.
Right. We're moving beyond just what they are doing to the technical and philosophical how. How does this actually work on people, on you, on a mass scale?
Let's revisit that metaphysical hook, the potential paradox. You mentioned the secular soul idea. Can you expand on why that concept acts as such a massive emotional anchor for the entire system?
I think it is the anchor. Look, in a world where traditional organized religion is, for many people, losing its influence or explanatory power, humans still seem to crave a sense of internal, enduring, maybe even infinite worth and purpose. We want to believe there's something special inside us.
And the potential paradox fills that void.
It fills that gap perfectly, beautifully. The self is framed not as a finite mortal being, flawed and complex, but as this infinite internal resource, an untapped gold mine. And your purpose in life becomes the endless project of developing, maximizing, and extracting value from that resource.
It essentially provides existential weight, a moral justification even for consumerism within the self-improvement sphere.
Precisely. I'm not just buying another productivity app or signing up for a leadership course. I am performing my solemn moral duty to my own inherent self-worth. I am tending to my secular soul.
And if you stop trying to unlock that potential,
You risk feeling like you're failing at life itself. You risk stepping outside the dominant moral framework of modern existence, which equates striving with virtue.
which, as we said, directly fuels these massive consumer markets, the multi-billion-dollar self-improvement industry, the coaching behemoth, the endless stream of productivity apps, they're all fundamentally selling you a key, a promise of access to that secular soul, that untapped potential.
And if you stop buying the keys, you're implicitly giving up on yourself, or so the narrative implies.
Okay, that covers the philosophical hook. Now let's turn our skeptical gaze, our deconstructionist lens, squarely onto the actual science that's so often used to legitimize all this. We need to really detail the epistemological concerns and the flawed research that underpin Axiom 3, the scientific legitimacy claim.
Yes. Because much of the research cited, especially from fields like organizational psychology or behavioral economics, is often not deployed for genuine, unbiased human understanding. It's frequently commissioned and utilized strictly as optimization science for managerial ends.
Meaning its goal isn't necessarily truth, but efficiency.
Its primary goal is often to find ways to make employees, say, 5% more efficient, or 10% more compliant, or 3% less likely to quit. Not necessarily 5% happier, or more fulfilled, or more autonomous, unless those things can be directly correlated with increased productivity or retention. The bias is towards the organization's goals, not the individual's well-being per se.
Okay, let's break down a specific methodological issue the sources highlight. Survey research limitations. They reference a widely cited massive browser study. Can you explain that one?
The browser study, yes. This study, often mentioned in self-help and business literature, apparently surveyed tens of thousands of employees, and 50,000, a huge number, which sounds impressive, and found a correlation. People who took the initiative to download and use a non-default web browser like Firefox or Chrome, back when Internet Explorer or Safari were the defaults, tended to be better employees.
Better in what way?
They showed slightly better job performance metrics, and interestingly, they tended to stay in their jobs longer.
Okay, that finding sounds neat. It's easily digestible, right? Download a better browser, become a better employee.
Exactly. It's simple, actionable advice. But the fatal flaw, the epistemological error, is that the research is almost entirely correlational, not causal.
Meaning?
It observes that two things are related, using a non-default browser and being a good employee, but it absolutely cannot prove that one causes the other. It doesn't mean the mere act of downloading Firefox magically transforms you into a more focused or loyal worker.
So what's likely going on?
What's far more likely is that the type of person who possesses the underlying personality traits needed to bother seeking out and installing an alternative browser, maybe traits like proactivity, curiosity, technical savvy, or even just a slight inclination to question defaults, is also the type of person who might naturally demonstrate better performance or initiative in a workplace setting.
So the browser choice is just a symptom or a marker of those underlying traits. It's not the cause of the good performance.
Precisely. The browser is a marker of a pre-existing attitude, not the magical cause of better work habits. But how does the self-help industry often package this finding?
Hack your productivity. Download a new browser to unlock your hidden focus.
Exactly. A perfect concrete example of mistaking correlation for causation, simplifying complex reality and packaging it for profit, all under the banner of science says.
Okay, another huge methodological issue. Survivorship bias. This seems particularly relevant to those pervasive trauma to triumph narratives.
Oh, it's absolutely crucial there. Survivorship bias is everywhere, especially when we look at narratives of business success or overcoming adversity. What stories do we typically hear?
We only hear from the survivors, the ones who made it, the people who succeeded against the odds and then wrote the best-selling book detailing the 5 simple steps they took.
Right. It's like conducting a study on how to win the lottery by only interviewing the jackpot winners and asking them about their secret technique. Maybe they always buy tickets on a Tuesday, or they visualize the winning numbers.
And then concluding that buying tickets on Tuesday guarantees a win.
Exactly. We never hear the stories, or certainly not in the same volume, from the thousands, maybe millions of people who suffered similar systemic setbacks, tried the exact same 5 steps or visualization techniques, and quietly failed. Why did they fail? Often because the systemic barriers, lack of capital, crushing debt, chronic health issues, discrimination, bad luck, were simply too high to overcome, regardless of their effort or mindset.
But their stories aren't inspiring. They aren't marketable.
They're not marketable, so they disappear from the popular narrative. And this dramatically skews our perception of typical outcomes. It leads the learner. It leads you to believe that struggle plus sufficient individual effort always equals triumph. It completely hides the painful statistical reality, which is that systemic injustice and structural factors often define outcomes far more powerfully than individual grit alone.
And we can't ignore confirmation bias either, especially as the sources note in that giver-taker research we discussed.
Definitely. If a researcher, or more often a self-help author or consultant, starts with a strong belief in that rigid, moralistic giver-taker binary, what are they going to look for in the data or in anecdotes?
They're going to look for examples that confirm their pre-existing belief.
Naturally. They will highlight the stories that fit the neat categories, the extreme examples that reinforce the dichotomy, and they will tend to downplay or ignore the vast, messy, complex reality of everyday human interaction, where self-interest and generosity constantly intermingle, where people are contextually giving and taking all the time in perfectly normal, functional ways. The bias confirms the binary.
So all this methodological weakness, all these biases, the misinterpretations, it all circles back to what the analysis calls the structural contradiction. This seems like the core vulnerability, the ultimate ideological lie holding the whole system together.
It really is the linchpin, and the primary lie, the core contradiction, is the systematic co-option of warm, fuzzy, collectivist language, words like community, teamwork, helping others, collaboration, connection, empathy.
Words we associate with positive social bonds.
Exactly. But this language is deployed almost entirely to advance a hyper-individualistic agenda.
How does that work? Can you give an example?
Well, the resulting paradigm isn't genuine collectivism or community. It's what some sociologists call networked individualism. You are actively encouraged to network, to collaborate, to add value to others, to help your peers, sure, but why?
Only as a means to an end.
Only ever as a strategic means to advance your own personal success trajectory. It's collaboration deployed competitively. You build social capital not for the sake of the group, but for your own future benefit.
So the ultimate cynical outcome is the realization that even being a giver within this specific framework isn't really about altruism. It's just a more sophisticated, perhaps more socially acceptable, long-term taker strategy.
That's the devastating conclusion of the analysis. You carefully build social capital, you accumulate goodwill, favors owed, positive reputation, and that accumulated goodwill is then strategically leveraged for individual gain, usually disguised as mutual benefit or team success. True unconditional community action, action done solely for the collective good without expectation of personal return, becomes almost impossible, almost irrational within this framework.
Wow, okay. We have thoroughly broken the system down. We've exposed the axioms, the machinery, the philosophical hooks, the rigged science, the core contradiction. So now what? What's the alternative? How does the learner, how do you listening, achieve cognitive liberation? How do you actually step out of this potential cage?
Right. This is the crucial pivot point. Because deconstruction, without offering a path forward, can just lead to cynicism. Cognitive liberation requires a fundamental, maybe even radical, shift in perception. It starts by moving away from the internalized self-blame and the feeling of perpetual inadequacy.
So principle number 1 for liberation.
The first step has to be a conscious, forceful rejection of the potential myth itself. You have to decide actively that your worth as a human being is inherent. It's intrinsic. It is not something hidden deep inside you that needs to be unlocked, proven, or purchased via a coaching subscription.
You are complete as you are right now. Full stop.
Full stop. The relentless expectation that you must be in a state of constant self-development, constant optimization, constant unlocking, that is the core lie to reject. You are not a resource to be maximized.
Okay, reject the potential myth. What's step 2?
Step 2 is deliberately shifting your focus. Move your attention entirely towards structural analysis. Stop looking inward, blaming yourself for failures or setbacks, asking, did I meditate enough? Did I not visualize hard enough? Did I fail to unlock my potential?
And start looking where?
Start examining the external systems, the rules of the game that actually define the limits of possibility in your situation. Actively ask the hard questions. Whose rules am I playing by here? Who wrote this test? Who benefits financially or politically if I accept this constraint, this definition of success, this narrative about my own inadequacy?
This connects to the third principle, right? Developing power position awareness.
Exactly. It's about recognizing, maybe uncomfortably, that success, as currently defined by the dominant system, is often not merely a function of individual grit or unlocked potential. It is overwhelmingly a result of one's position within existing social and economic hierarchies.
It's like
Things like privilege, class privilege, racial privilege, gender privilege, things like inherited capital, access to elite family networks, the quality of education you received, even just lucky timing. These positional factors often matter exponentially more than individual hustle, yet the potential myth systematically hides their importance.
So realizing the system is often rigged to reward position, not just abstract potential.
Yes. Understanding how the game board is tilted is crucial for liberation. It stops you from blaming yourself for outcomes largely determined by the structure.
Okay, so if you reject the potential myth, focus on structures, and understand your position, you're essentially rejecting the dominant capitalist definition of worth and success. What replaces it? You need alternative success metrics.
You do. And the sources are quite powerful here because they don't just critique, they propose tangible alternatives. Metrics that deliberately shift value away from the market and towards human flourishing and community.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Okay, think about consciously valuing community contribution versus personal achievement. Instead of asking, how high did I climb the corporate ladder alone? The question becomes, how much did I contribute to uplifting those around me? How did I support collective endeavors? How did I improve the well-being of my actual local community?
That's a huge shift. Another one.
Valuing contentment and fulfillment versus relentless growth. What if the primary goal of life isn't infinite expansion and accumulation, but experiencing genuine peace, satisfaction, and meaning right now, in this moment, accepting enough? That single shift changes every decision you make. It forces you off the hamster wheel of perpetual optimization.
What about creativity?
Measuring creative expression versus purely productive output. Is the work you're doing meaningful to you? Does it allow for genuine self-expression, craft, or artistry, regardless of its immediate monetization potential? Or is it just another widget, another piece of content created quickly and cynically to feed the insatiable demand machine? Valuing the intrinsic quality of the act, not just the market outcome.
And maybe the most radical shift. Systemic change impact versus individual mobility.
Yes. This asks, are you primarily using your energy, your resources, your potential to simply find a slightly more comfortable or lucrative spot for yourself inside the existing cage? Or are you dedicating at least some of that energy towards actually trying to reform or dismantle the cage itself? Advocating for better policies, fairer labor rights, more equitable social structures, genuine community power. It's the difference between climbing the ladder and questioning why the ladder exists in its current form.
Okay, those are powerful alternative metrics, but living them out requires practical steps. What are the concrete resistance strategies the learner, you listening, can implement starting right now to protect yourself from this ideological capture, this potential trap?
First, and maybe simplest, is developing consumption awareness. Start recognizing self-help books, coaching programs, corporate trainings, even a lot of organizational psychology research, not as benevolent guides offering universal objective truth.
Oh, it is.
As parts of a vast, interconnected, extractive industry. An industry designed specifically to monetize your anxieties, your insecurities, and your socially conditioned sense of inadequacy. Treat its claims more like sophisticated advertising, less like revealed scripture. Apply skepticism.
Good advice. Second strategy.
Cultivate aggressive structural questioning as a default habit. Every single time a new psychological framework, a new productivity hack, a new personality test, or a new communication model is presented to you, whether at work, online, or in a book, you must actively, immediately ask, cui bono?
Who benefits?
Who benefits from me believing this? Does this new structure primarily benefit the corporation by making me work harder, faster, or more compliantly? Or does it genuinely benefit me by giving me more autonomy, more meaning, or more control over my actual life and labor? Follow the incentives.
Third strategy, critical literacy. This feels essential.
Absolutely essential. You need to make the active deconstruction of scientific-sounding claims a regular habit. Don't just accept headlines or summaries. When you see studies show X, take 3 minutes. Try to find the original source if possible. Who funded it? What was the actual methodology? How big was the sample size? Was it correlational or causal? Look for survivorship bias. Learn the basic logical fallacies.
So you don't just blindly accept a highly marketed chart or a confident assertion as proof of some moral or professional requirement.
Exactly. For instance, if you read an article claiming all successful entrepreneurs wake up at 4 a.m., your immediate critical literacy response needs to be, okay, define successful. How large and representative was the sample? Who funded this study? And crucially, did they track the undoubtedly vast number of people who also wake up at 4 a.m. but whose businesses failed miserably? Question the narrative, always.
And the final, resistance strategy. This feels like it ties back to the alternative metrics.
It does. It's about fostering alternative community building. You can't realistically reject the dominant cage entirely alone. It's too pervasive, too powerful. You need solidarity. You need to actively seek out and build connections with others who are also trying to step off the treadmill.
What does that look like in practice?
It could look like many things. Developing shared, non-capitalist definitions of value and success within a trusted group, engaging in genuine skill sharing or mutual aid networks, creating cooperatives or time banks, prioritizing collective well-being and action over purely individual performance metrics. It's about building pockets of resistance where different values can actually flourish. That shared, self-defined value system, nurtured in community, is perhaps the truest form of liberation from the potential cage. And that's our deep dive for this week.
Remember, the most dangerous illusion is the one you don't know you're in.
But now you know. So here's our question for you.
What is the one story about success or potential that you've been carrying that after today's dive, you're finally ready to put on the chopping block?
Let us know in the comments. Question the narrative, deconstruct the dogma, see the system.
We'll see you next time. Stay skeptical. Thank you for joining us.